that it will change the lives of so many Canadians, even if Quebec already has such a program. Yesterday, I had a good conversation with Minister Dubé on this topic, and I think that we will reach an agreement with Quebec very soon.
Alderman Norfolk.
Common sense Conservatives will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. After 8 years, this Liberal NDP Prime Minister is not worth the cost, the crime, or the corruption. Never before in the history of this great nation have so many people have to resort to food banks. Thousands are now resorting to dumpster diving because they can no longer afford the cost of food. Will this Prime Minister show some compassion and cancel the April 1st carbon tax hike?
That's the right thing to do.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
That colleague is from Ontario, where I'm from, Mr. Speaker, and the climate rebate that Ontarians will receive is over $1,100. That's for a family of 4. Mr. Speaker, I'm not surprised, though, to hear that member and the Conservatives continue to bring up these points. They want to take money out of the pockets of Canadians. Today, historic legislation tabled in the House of Commons on pharmacare. The Leader of the Opposition ran away when asked if he would support pharmacare. When it comes to student loans and helping students, when it comes to EI, pensions in particular, they're nowhere to be seen. They want to make cuts. They're a party of austerity, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Haldeman Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are getting back far less from this government than they're paying in carbon tax.
That's right.
According to Second Harvest, this year we'll see a 30% rise in the demand for food charity in some regions. Where I live in Southern Ontario, we produce food to feed the entire nation, yet so many families there still do not have enough income to cover basic food expenses. Why won't this government just do the right thing? Cancel the 23% carbon tax hike on April 1st so that Canadian families can afford food again.
Yeah, do the right thing.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
That gloom and doom member who wants to take Canada out of the UN needs to know a little bit of good news for a change, Mr. Speaker. We've had many months of good news for Canadians. Just recently, Statistics Canada announced that in January we gained 37,000 new jobs, and there are 1 million more Canadians, Mr. Speaker, working than before the pandemic. The unemployment rate is at 5.7%, and wage growth is outpacing inflation, and that's even more true for women. You'd think that member would care about such things.
The Honourable Member from Battleford's Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, common sense Conservatives will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Because after 8 years, Canadians know that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost, crime, or corruption. Life has never been more expensive in this country. 1 million Canadians will be relying on food banks this year alone. And still, this Prime Minister is hell-bent on hiking the carbon tax up by 23% on April 1st. Mr. Speaker, why won't the Prime Minister cancel his carbon tax increase and help make life more affordable for Canadians?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Canadians have had enough of the gloom and doom coming from over here. They're deliberately ignoring the truth about how our government has supported Canadians.
Order. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, 2.3 million Canadians have been lifted out of poverty since this government took office and started caring about Canadians by putting supports in place that those guys had spent all their time cutting. Families throughout Canada have seen their child care fees slashed, in many cases down to $10 a day, thanks to this government and this Bill C-35 that we're getting ready to pass today.
The Honourable Member member from Vancouver Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Black Mental Health Week begins next week. It's a time to amplify Black voices and support equity in mental health. It is time to correct the disproportionate lack of Black health researchers so we can deliver culturally appropriate mental health solutions. It is time to act to improve the wide gap in health outcomes for many Black Canadians that is the result of historical and systemic anti-Black racism. Can the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions tell us what her department is doing to improve access to culturally safe and informed mental health services for Black communities across the country?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member. She is such a tremendous advocate on so many issues that matter to Canadians. Black communities across Canada continue to experience social and economic inequities which have persisted for far too long and have negative impacts on their mental health. We know there's more work to do, Mr. Speaker, and we're committed to doing the work together. Through programs like the Mental Health of Black Canadians Fund, we are supporting organizations to develop culturally safe, focused, knowledge-based programs with capacity to improve the mental health of Black Canadians and meet their needs. We'll keep working with the Black community across Canada, Mr.
The Honourable Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Common sense Conservatives will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Meanwhile, after 8 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, Canadians know he's not worth the cost of the crime or the corruption. And just yesterday, we learned that in the Prime Minister's $60 million Arrive scam, one of the contractors who was paid millions is actually a bureaucrat for this NDP Liberal government. That's why Common Sense Conservatives passed a motion in this House demanding that this government produce all of the documents on this Prime Minister scandal. Will he stand in his place and commit to releasing every last page?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, 24 hours. 24 hours after we became aware that the CEO of Dalian was a D&D employee, we've taken action, Mr. Speaker. We have suspended all contracts with Dalian. We have suspended the employee, and we have launched an investigation on how this person became an employee of D&D in the first place. Mr. Speaker, we will act to ensure that we protect the integrity of our institutions and our government.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's offer it a little louder for those in the back. What we're looking for is a commitment from this government to release every page of those documents, because after 8 years, it's clear to see that these Liberals aren't worth the corruption with their NDP Liberal Prime Minister. It's very clear, a $60 million scandal with people in their basements getting paid $20 million, not doing any IT work, and now we have that minister's staff who are getting paid millions of dollars while Canadians are lined up at food banks. So another question, and I'll say it loud so the minister can hear it, will they stand in their place to getting Canadians money back for their corruption?
The Honourable Minister for National Defence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'll simply remind the member opposite how quickly we acted. This information became to our attention yesterday. And since that time, we have suspended all contracts with Dalian. We've suspended the member, and we've launched a thorough investigation that will determine how this individual became to be employed. Mr. Speaker, we are demonstrating...
Colleagues, especially the member from Brantford Branch who's about to get up to ask a question, just to remind that I expect all colleagues to have respect for each other and to wait their turn to speak when they're recognized by the chair. And at that point, when they have the opportunity to speak, I will also request that all people listen to that member. The Honourable Minister has 15 seconds left on the clock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I don't want to repeat what I've already said, except to remind the members of this House that when this information came to our attention, we took immediate action. We took the steps necessary to protect Canadians' interests and to remove this individual from our employ.
The Honourable Member from Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, Common Sense Conservatives will axe the tax. We will build the homes. We will fix the budget. We will stop the crime. Well, after 8 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the cost, crime or corruption. Yesterday we learned that yet another company received $8 million tax dollars for the Arrive scam. But it gets better. This one, owned by a national defense bureaucrat. The rot continues. Yesterday, Parliament passed our motion to force the government to release all documents and to repay taxpayers. Will the government end the cover-up and release the documents? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister for National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite began his question by telling about all the things that the Conservatives propose to do at some distant point in the future. But, Mr. Speaker, let us remember what they did when they were in government, where they cut the defence spending, for example, to less than 1% of GDP.
Less than 1%.
When they cut the resources of the police, our national security intelligence advisors, all of the people whose job it is to protect us and to maintain the integrity of our institutions, they cut them. And, Mr. Speaker, we've been rebuilding the government to get the work done, and we are prepared to take the action necessary.
I'll ask the honourable member from Southwest St. Margaret's, please, to wait his turn to ask a question. The honourable member,
The honourable member for Alfred Pellan. Mr. Speck, in Quebec, we're fortunate enough to have tourist attractions that charm people here, elsewhere in Canada and abroad. The tourism contribution represents more than 3% of employment and 2% of the GDP, whether it be for sustainable tourism, agritourism, outdoor experiences, Indigenous tourism, or rural tourism. Can the minister tell us how our government is going to maximize the growth potential of this sector? Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. And he can tell everyone in his riding and all Quebecers that as of today, the Tourism Growth Fund is ready to receive applications from all kinds of companies and associations in order to choose projects and make tourists' experience better. Conservatives don't believe in tourism. They want to cut everywhere in Saguenay and Gaspésie, but on this side of the House, we stand up for tourism in Canada. Thank you.
The honourable member from South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Mr. Speaker, last summer's wildfires devastated communities across Canada, and the Minister of Emergency Preparedness has admitted that the upcoming wildfire season will be even worse. Canadians want their government to take decisive action, and according to last week's Abacus poll, 74% of them want to see this done through a new national wildfire fighting force. But the Liberals are taking a go-slow approach. The wildfire season is already starting, so when will this government act to create a national wildfire fighting force?
That's right.
The Honourable Minister.
I want to thank the member for the question. In fact, actually, we're taking immediate action, taking the lessons learned from not only last year, but previous years as well. First and foremost, we need to make sure that all the resources that we put in place go directly to fighting wildfires, and that's to the local level. So we have already trained approximately 500 firefighters, Mr. Speaker, putting more personnel to support on the recovery. Yes, we are reviewing the overall national system as well. When any support that we provide, we're going to make sure that it actually has the maximum impact. Thank you.
The honourable member from Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, we're learning that Palestinians in Gaza have been shot and killed while waiting for aid at a time when the UN reports at least a quarter of those in Gaza are one step from famine. Meanwhile, Amnesty International reports that Israel has failed to comply with the ICJ ruling requiring them to take immediate steps to prevent genocide, including allowing humanitarian aid in. In light of this, when will this government reinstate UNRWA funding, which millions of Palestinians rely on for food, and call on Israel to follow the ICJ ruling?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Stories coming out of Gaza are extremely preoccupying. This is catastrophic. I would call this a nightmare scenario. So, at all times, international humanitarian law must be respected, and both parties must respect the ICJ ruling. And we need to do more to make sure that humanitarian aid is going into Gaza, and at all times, civilians must be protected. Thank you so much.
This brings to an end a question period.